The evening air at Pine Ridge Country Club was thick with cigar smoke and privilege. James Carson sat back in his leather chair, swirling his aged whiskey, while half listening to the usual boring conversations about yacht purchases and stock portfolios. At 35, he was the youngest billionaire in the room, having built his tech empire from scratch. But success had made him restless, maybe even a little arrogant. "You know what your problem is, Carson?" Richard Bennett, one of the older members, leaned forward with that irritating smirk he always wore. "You've never had to work for anything that really matters." James raised an eyebrow. "Really? Last time I checked, building a multi-billion-dollar company from nothing counts as work." "Money's easy for people like you," Thomas Parker chimed in, puffing his cigar. "But real life? Real connections? You wouldn't last a month outside your comfort zone." The conversation might have ended there on any other night, but something about their smug faces and the warmth of expensive whiskey made James lean forward. "Try me." The challenge sparked something in the room. The other men exchanged glances, and Richard's smirk grew wider. "All right, Wonder Boy. Let's make it interesting. You're always dating these cookie-cutter socialites. We bet you couldn't maintain a marriage for 1 year with someone completely different from your world." James scoffed. "That's it? A marriage? Please, I could do that in my sleep." "Not so fast," Thomas interrupted. "We get to approve the candidate. Someone who'd challenge everything you think you know about life. Someone like—" He paused, glancing at a magazine on the coffee table. It featured an article about local healthcare heroes, like Dr. Maya Thompson, the neurosurgeon who's been making waves with her community health programs. James picked up the magazine, studying the photo. Dr. Thompson was beautiful in an understated way, with confident eyes and a warm smile that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. She was black, brilliantly accomplished, and according to the article, spent most of her free time running medical programs in underserved neighborhoods, basically everything his usual social circle was not. Interesting choice, James mused, his mind already working on the challenge and the stakes. If you can't seal the deal, or if the marriage ends before a year, you donate $1 billion to charities of our choosing, Richard proposed. If you succeed, we'll each match your regular annual charity contributions for the next 5 years. James did the math quickly. Their matching contributions would mean nearly $2 billion for his foundation. Money he could use however he wanted, without board approval or shareholder oversight. "Deal," he said, reaching for his phone. "I'll have my team arrange a meeting with Dr. Thompson tomorrow." "Not so fast," Thomas cautioned. "She can't know about the bet. That would defeat the purpose. This has to look natural." James laughed, already plotting his strategy. "Trust me, I know how to make things happen. I'll have her saying I do within 3 months." What James didn't notice was the slight frown on the club butler's face as he cleared the glasses, or the way the magazine photo of Dr. Thompson seemed to stare back at him with knowing eyes. He was too busy thinking about how to approach someone so different from his usual type, someone who probably wouldn't be impressed by his usual tactics of expensive gifts and grand gestures. That night, as he rode home in his Bentley, James began researching Dr. Maya Thompson more thoroughly. Harvard Medical School, top of her class. Pioneering research in pediatric neurosurgery. Founded 3 free clinics in underserved areas. Raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put her through school. Everything about her life was earned through hard work, the opposite of the silver spoon circles he usually moved in. "This might actually be interesting," he murmured to himself, already drafting plans for their accidental first meeting. He decided he'd make a large anonymous donation to her newest clinic project, then arrange to be there for the opening ceremony. It was the perfect setup. She'd see him as a generous benefactor, not knowing he was playing a much longer game. As James finally drifted off to sleep that night in his penthouse apartment, he had no idea that this bet would change far more than just his bank account. He couldn't have known that Dr. Maya Thompson would turn out to be the one person capable of seeing through every wall he'd built around himself, or that his carefully planned game was about to become the most real thing in his life. But that's the funny thing about life. Sometimes the biggest changes come disguised as simple bets, and the most valuable things can't be measured in billions. 2 weeks after the bet, James stood at the back of the crowd gathered for the new clinic's opening ceremony. He traded his usual designer suit for something more subtle, still expensive but not flashy. The autumn breeze carried the scent of coffee from a nearby cart, where clinic staff were serving refreshments to the gathering crowd. Dr. Maya Thompson stood at the podium, her voice clear and passionate as she addressed the community members. She wore a simple blue dress that somehow looked more elegant than any of the $1,000 outfits James saw at his usual charity galas. "This clinic belongs to all of you," she was saying, her hands gesturing to emphasize her points. "Healthcare isn't a privilege, it's a right. And starting today, every child in this neighborhood will have access to the care they deserve." James found himself actually listening, really listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak. There was something magnetic about the way she connected with the crowd, how she spoke to them like neighbors rather than an audience. When it was his turn to present the donation check, he walked up feeling strangely nervous, something he hadn't experienced since his first investor pitch years ago. Maya's handshake was firm, her smile professional but reserved. "Mr. Carson," she said, "your generosity will help so many families. Though I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here. This isn't exactly the kind of event that usually attracts billionaire tech CEOs." There was a hint of challenge in her voice that caught him off guard. "Maybe I'm trying to broaden my horizons," he replied, attempting his usual charming smile. "Would you be willing to tell me more about your work over coffee?" Maya looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Coffee? Not some exclusive restaurant." "I saw a small place around the corner. Looks like they actually focus on making good coffee instead of impressing people." That earned him a genuine smile, small but real. "Now I'm really intrigued. The famous James Carson at a regular coffee shop. I have to see this." The coffee shop was exactly what neighborhood spots should be: warm, slightly worn around the edges, with the kind of comfortable chairs that invited real conversation. Maya ordered a simple black coffee. James, who usually drank only specialty roasts, followed her lead. "So," she said, stirring her coffee, "what's the real reason you're interested in our little clinic? Your usual donations go to much flashier causes." James had prepared for this question, but sitting across from her direct gaze, his practiced answer felt hollow. "Honestly, I've been thinking lately about making a real difference, not just writing checks for tax write-offs. And this sudden interest in community healthcare has nothing to do with the publicity of helping an inner-city clinic." "You don't pull punches, do you?" James laughed, surprised to find himself enjoying her directness. "Can't afford to. My patients and this community count on me to be straight with them. Same goes for potential donors." They talked for over an hour. Maya told him about growing up watching her mother work multiple jobs to make ends meet, about the moment she decided to become a doctor after seeing how differently people were treated based on their insurance cards. James found himself sharing things too, real things, not his usual polished stories. He told her about the pressure of always having to be the smartest person in the room, about lying awake at night, wondering if he'd ever done anything truly meaningful with his success. "You know what your problem is," Maya said as they were leaving. "You've spent so long playing the role of billionaire tech genius that you've forgotten how to just be James." The comment hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. "And you've got me all figured out after one coffee?" "Not even close," she smiled. "But I'm starting to think there might be more to you than your bank account." Over the next few weeks, they kept meeting. Coffee shops turned into walks in the park, casual lunches between her surgeries. James found himself looking forward to their conversations, actually caring what Maya thought about things. He caught himself turning down fancy party invitations to help her organize medical supplies at the clinic. The real surprise came during a charity gala he couldn't avoid. Maya agreed to come as his plus one, looking stunning in a deep purple gown. But instead of playing the expected role of arm candy, she spent the evening discussing healthcare policy with senators and challenging tech CEOs about their corporate responsibility. "Your date is interesting," Richard commented, watching Maya argue passionately with a hospital board member about patient care standards. "She's brilliant," James replied, surprising himself with how defensive he felt. "And she's not my date. She's..." He paused, realizing he didn't know how to finish that sentence anymore. Later that night, as they walked through the city streets with Maya's heels in her hand, she nudged his shoulder. "Your friends seemed shocked to see you with someone who actually has opinions." They're not really my friends, James admitted. More like people I'm expected to socialize with. Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. You know what? For a guy who started this whole thing probably thinking he was doing me some kind of favor, you're turning out to be surprisingly human. James felt his chest tighten with guilt about the bet, but before he could dwell on it, Maya had grabbed his hand and was pulling him toward a street vendor selling late-night ice cream. Come on, billionaire boy, let me introduce you to the best dessert in the city. And no, it's not covered in gold leaf. Standing there eating dollar ice cream cones under the streetlights, James realized with a jolt that he hadn't thought about the bet in weeks. Somewhere between coffee shops and clinic supply runs, between heated debates and quiet conversations, something real had started growing. And for the first time in his life, James Carson was terrified, not of losing a bet, but of losing something much more valuable. 6 months into their marriage, James sat in his office, staring at an old medical file he'd just discovered while organizing his sister Amy's paperwork. His hands trembled slightly as he read through the details of a surgery performed 5 years ago, a groundbreaking procedure that had saved Amy's life when other doctors had given up hope. The surgeon's name on the file, Dr. Maya Thompson. James remembered that terrible time, but he'd been so focused on running his company that he'd left all the medical details to his parents. He'd written checks, hired the best specialists, but had never actually met the surgeon who'd performed the miracle operation. Now, looking at Maya's signature on the forms, everything clicked into place. His phone buzzed, a message from Maya, coming home late. Big surgery today, don't wait up. Home. Somewhere along the way, their shared penthouse had actually become home, filled with Maya's medical journals scattered across the coffee table, her favorite tea mugs in the kitchen, and photos of them together that didn't feel staged for social media. He called Amy immediately. Of course I remember Dr. Thompson, Amy said when he asked. She was amazing. The other doctors treated me like a hopeless case, but she sat with me for hours, explaining everything. She even made jokes while I was scared about the surgery. Why are you asking about this now? James's voice caught. Amy, Dr. Thompson is Maya. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. You're Maya? The one you married? Oh my God, James. Amy's voice turned serious. Please tell me you didn't know this when you married her. Please tell me this wasn't some weird gratitude thing. No, I had no idea. The weight of his original motivation, the bet, hit him like a punch to the gut. Amy, I messed up. I messed up so badly. What do you mean? James, what did you do? He couldn't tell her about the bet. He couldn't tell anyone. But he had to tell Maya. The thought made his chest tight with panic. These past months, he'd fallen in love with her brilliant mind, her unwavering dedication to her patients, her ability to see through his facades to the person he could be. The bet had become meaningless weeks ago, but its shadow still loomed over everything. That evening, he waited up despite Maya's message. She came home late, still in her surgical scrubs, looking tired but satisfied. Tough surgery? He asked, handing her a cup of the chamomile tea she always drank after long operations. Challenging but successful. She took the tea with a grateful smile. You didn't have to wait up. I need to show you something. He led her to his home office and handed her Amy's file. Maya looked at it, confusion turning to recognition. I remember this case. One of my first major surgeries. The patient was. She looked up sharply. Your sister. James nodded, watching emotions flicker across her face. You saved her life. You spent hours with her, made her feel safe when she was terrified. And I never knew. I was too busy with my company to even meet my sister's surgeon. Maya set down the file carefully. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to know something. James took a deep breath. When we first met, I wasn't being completely honest about my intentions. Maya's expression shifted, becoming guarded. What do you mean? But before James could continue, his phone buzzed with a message from Richard. Having second thoughts about our little arrangement. Remember, only 6 months to go. $1 billion on the line, sport. He'd forgotten to turn off message previews on his lock screen. Maya saw the message before he could grab the phone. What arrangement? Her voice was quiet, dangerous. What $1 billion, James? The moment stretched between them like glass about to shatter. James looked at his wife. This brilliant, compassionate woman who had saved his sister's life long before he'd made a stupid bet about marrying her and realized he was about to lose something precious. Maya, please let me explain. It started as a bet, but it's not that anymore. You have to believe me. He watched the color drain from her face as understanding dawned. A bet. She picked up Emmy's file again, her hands shaking slightly. So what was this? Were you going to use this to win your bet? Make some grand gesture about fate bringing us together? No. I just found out today, I swear. Maya, please. Did you even donate to the clinic because you cared? Or was that part of your strategy? She was backing away from him now, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Every coffee shop conversation, every late-night talk, was any of it real? It became real, James said desperately. Maya, somewhere along the way, it all became real. I love. Don't. She held up her hand. Don't you dare say that right now. She looked around the office at the life they'd built together. You know what the worst part is? I actually thought you changed. I thought I'd helped you see beyond your privileged bubble. But this whole marriage was just another game for rich boys to play. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. You know, I remember Emmy. She was scared but so brave. She trusted me completely. I wish I could have trusted her brother the same way. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than if she'd slammed it. James stood in his empty office, surrounded by evidence of the real connection he'd destroyed with a stupid bet, and realized that for all his billions, he might have just lost the only thing that really mattered. The recording spread across social media like wildfire. Someone at the country club had captured the original bet on their phone, James's arrogant voice clear as day, making the wager that had seemed so clever at the time. Now, watching it play on every news channel, he felt physically sick. Bet you couldn't maintain a marriage for 1 year with someone completely different from your world. His own laughter echoed from the TV speakers. That's it. A marriage? Please. I could do that in my sleep. James shut off the TV, but the damage was already done. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. #Billionaire bet was trending. News vans camped outside his building. But none of that mattered compared to the silence from Maya. She hadn't come home after their confrontation. 3 days had passed, and the only contact he'd had was a formal email from her lawyer. Even his sister Emmy wouldn't take his calls. Finally, his phone lit up with Maya's name. His heart jumped until he saw it was a public statement she released. To address the recent revelations about my marriage to James Carson. Yes, I was unaware that our relationship began as a bet. I am taking time to process this information privately. My focus remains on my patients and our community health initiatives. I ask for privacy during this time. Professional. Dignified. Everything he hadn't been. The next morning, Richard showed up at his office, looking smug. Well, looks like you're about to lose our little wager. Should I start preparing the paperwork for that $1 billion donation? James stood up slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. Get out. Come on, sport. Don't be a sore loser. We all knew you couldn't. I said get out. James's fist slammed onto his desk. You want the $1 billion? Take it. Take everything. But don't you dare act like this was just a game. I lost my wife. I lost the one person who actually saw me as something more than a bank account. Richard's smirk faded. Your wife? Please. She married you for the money, just like. She saved my sister's life. James's voice cracked. 5 years ago, before any of this, she performed groundbreaking surgery on Emmy when no one else would even try. She spent hours comforting a scared teenager she didn't even know. And I repaid that by making her life into a betting chip. For the first time, Richard looked uncomfortable. I didn't know about your sister. No, you didn't. Just like you don't know that Maya uses her entire salary to fund scholarships for kids who want to become doctors, or that she still does free clinics on weekends, or that she taught me more about being human in 6 months than I learned in 35 years of being rich. James walked to his office window, looking out at the city. You know what the funny thing is? I actually won your bet. Maya did change everything I thought I knew about life. She showed me what real success looks like. It's not about money or power or winning stupid bets. It's about making a difference in people's lives. He turned back to Richard. So congratulations. You prove your point. I couldn't last in a marriage outside my comfort zone, not because of Maya, but because I wasn't worthy of her. After Richard left, James sat alone in his office, scrolling through photos on his phone. Maya laughing at some silly joke he'd made. Maya falling asleep on their couch surrounded by medical journals. Maya teaching him how to make her mother's special tea. A text from Emmy finally came through. I just talked to Maya. She told me everything, including how you found out about her being my surgeon. She's hurting, James, really hurting. James typed back with shaking fingers. I know. I messed up so badly, Emmy. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe you can't fix it, but you can try to deserve her. Those words hit him hard. Deserve her. Had he ever really tried to deserve Maya? Or had he just assumed his money and charm would be enough? He opened his laptop and started typing. Not excuses or apologies. Those would come later if Maya ever wanted to hear them. Instead, he began drafting plans for a new foundation, one that would fund medical education for students from underserved communities, one that would support the kind of work Maya had dedicated her life to. The media was calling it a scandal, a billionaire's game exposed. But as James worked through the night, he realized this wasn't the end of a game. It was the beginning of becoming the person Maya had always believed he could be, whether she ever forgave him or not. Outside his window, the city lights blurred through tears he finally allowed himself to shed. Somewhere out there, Maya was probably in surgery right now, saving another life, making the world better one patient at a time. And for the first time in his life, James Carson, the man who had everything, understood what it meant to truly lose something priceless. Maya stood in the operating room, her hands steady as always, even though her world had fallen apart days ago. The 7-hour surgery demanded every bit of her focus, and she was grateful for that. It was only in these moments, bent over the operating table, that she could forget about the headlines, the pitying looks, the constant phone calls from reporters. Scalpel, she said, her voice clear behind her surgical mask. This was her sanctuary. Here, she wasn't the woman who'd been fooled by a billionaire's bet. She was just Dr. Thompson, doing what she'd always done, saving lives. Later, peeling off her surgical gear, she checked her phone. 27 missed calls, dozens of messages. One from Amy Carson caught her eye. I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone with the last name Carson right now, but I needed to tell you, what you did for me 5 years ago wasn't just surgery. You gave me hope when everyone else had given up. My brother messed up terribly, but please don't let his stupidity make you doubt the amazing person you are. Maya's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She'd barely cried since that night, hadn't allowed herself to. But Amy's message cracked something in her careful composure. Her mother called just then, perfect timing as always. Baby girl, her mom's warm voice came through the speaker. I'm watching you on the news again. They're calling you an inspiration, you know. The way you're handling this with such grace. Maya sank onto the bench in the doctor's lounge. I don't feel very graceful, Mom. I feel stupid. All those times I defended him to you, talked about how he was different from what everyone thought. Listen to me, her mother's voice turned stern. You are not stupid. You saw good in someone and gave them a chance to be better. That's not weakness, that's who I raised you to be. But he made me into a bet, Mom. A game. Maya's voice finally broke. And the worst part, I actually fell in love with him. The real him, underneath all that billionaire armor. Or maybe that was just another lie too. Maya Elizabeth Thompson, her mother used her full name, something she hadn't done since Maya was a teenager. You stop that right now. That man might have started this as a game, but I watched him change. We all did. The way he looked at you when you weren't watching, that wasn't acting. It doesn't matter now, Maya wiped her eyes. I can't trust anything about our relationship anymore. Was he really interested in the clinic's work, or was that part of his plan? Did he actually care about my patients' stories, or was he just collecting points in his little game? A knock on the door interrupted her. Dr. Chen, her mentor, poked his head in. Maya? The Thompson Foundation is online free. They want to expand your community health program nationwide. They're offering full funding. Maya stared at him. The Thompson Foundation had been her white whale. She'd been trying to get their attention for years. Why now? Dr. Chen hesitated. The donation, it came through James Carson's new medical education foundation, but he specifically requested his name be kept out of the press releases, said the work should speak for itself. After Dr. Chen left, Maya's mother spoke again. Sounds like someone's trying to do better. Or trying to buy forgiveness, Maya countered, but her voice lacked conviction. That evening, she finally went back to the penthouse to pack some things. The place felt different, emptier somehow. James's laptop was open on the kitchen counter, displaying plans for something called the Future Healers Initiative. Maya couldn't help reading. Program mission: to identify and support medical students from underserved communities, providing full scholarships and mentorship opportunities. Inspired by doctors who prove every day that true healing comes from understanding the communities we serve. Next to the laptop lay a handwritten letter. Maya, I won't insult you with excuses or apologies. You deserve better than words on paper. Instead, I'm trying to put your lessons into action. Everything you taught me about real impact, about using privilege to open doors for others, I'm finally listening. The foundation is yours if you want it. If not, I'll make sure it goes to someone who'll honor your vision. Either way, it exists because you showed me what real success looks like. I never deserved you, but you deserved better than a bet. James. Maya sank into a kitchen chair, the letter trembling in her hands. On the counter, her favorite mug still sat where she'd left it that last morning, when her world still made sense. James had bought it for her after she'd mentioned missing her mother's tea. He tracked down the exact brand from her childhood home. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emmy. He's different now. Still an idiot, but a better one. And it's because of you. Maya looked around the apartment, at the medical journals James had started reading just to understand her work better, at the photo wall he'd created documenting every clinic opening and community event, at the sticky notes he'd leave with silly jokes to make her smile after long surgeries. The gain had ended, but the changes it created were real. The question was, were they enough? She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, where she kept her mother's favorite saying, "Life's biggest tests don't have right answers, just honest ones." Maya didn't have the answer yet, but as she packed her things, she left her favorite mug on the counter. Sometimes the smallest objects held the biggest questions. Was it really just a bet if it changed everyone involved? Could trust, once broken, grow back stronger? And most importantly, was love real if it started as a lie but ended as the deepest truth either of them had ever known? 3 months after Maya left, James sat in a crowded community center, listening to high school students share their dreams of becoming doctors. He wasn't there as a wealthy donor or a media figure. Those days were over. Instead, he sat quietly in the back, taking notes, learning what these kids really needed to succeed. The textbooks alone cost more than my mom makes in 2 months, one student explained, her voice steady despite her nervousness. And that's if I even get into medical school. James wrote it down, adding it to his growing list. He'd already started partnerships with publishing companies to provide free medical textbooks to scholarship recipients. But it wasn't enough. Maya had taught him that real change meant understanding the whole picture. His phone buzzed, another message from Richard about the bet money. James had already transferred the $1 billion, but not to Richard's chosen charities. Instead, he used it to establish medical scholarships and community health programs, focusing on the neighborhoods Maya had always fought hardest to help. "You broke the terms of our bet," Richard had complained. "Sue me," James had replied. "Actually, please do. I'd love to explain to a judge exactly what kind of bet we made." That had shut Richard up quickly. A tap on his shoulder pulled James from his thoughts. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the community center. "The students would like to ask you some questions, Mr. Carson, if you're willing." James hesitated. He'd been trying to keep a low profile, but these kids deserved honest answers. He moved to the front of the room, facing their curious faces. "Why are you really doing this?" asked a girl in the front row. "The news says it's just to win back your wife." The room got quiet. Everyone knew the story. It had been impossible to miss. But James had never publicly discussed it. "I'm doing this because someone taught me that true success isn't about winning," he said carefully. "It's about making sure others get their chance to succeed." "But you lost everything," another student pointed out. "The newspapers said your company's stock dropped when investors thought you were having a breakdown." James actually smiled at that. I haven't lost everything. I lost something precious because I was too blind to see its real value. But that opened my eyes to what actually matters. He looked around the room. Each of you has a dream of helping others. That's worth more than any amount of money. I learned that too late, but maybe I can help make your path a little easier than mine was. After the session, James walked to the clinic where he'd first met Maya. He still came here every week, not for publicity or praise, but to help with whatever was needed, filing paperwork, organizing supplies, sometimes just listening to patients' stories. The clinic staff had been understandably cold to him at first, but over months of quiet, consistent work, things had changed. They saw him pushing through his own heartbreak to support what Maya had built, never asking for recognition or trying to contact her against her wishes. "Your sister called again," the receptionist told him as he hung up his coat. "She says Maya's program in Africa is doing amazing work." James nodded, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. Maya had thrown herself into international medical work, expanding her programs to communities around the world. He followed her progress through news articles and Amy's occasional updates, proud of her success even as he missed her more each day. That evening, he sat in his new apartment, a simple place near the clinic, the penthouse long sold, reviewing applications for the next round of medical scholarships. A news alert popped up on his laptop. Maya had just won a prestigious humanitarian award. The photo showed her accepting the award, looking elegant and confident as always. His finger hovered over the congratulations button on his phone, but he stopped himself. He promised to give her space, to prove through actions rather than words that he changed. Instead, he wrote another check, anonymous as always, to support her new initiative in rural communities. Then he turned back to the scholarship applications, reading each story carefully, looking for the dreamers and fighters who reminded him of a young Maya Thompson, determined to change the world one patient at a time. A soft knock interrupted his work. It was Amy. "You missed dinner again," she said, setting down a takeout bag. "The family's worried about you." "I'm fine," he started to say, but Amy cut him off. "You're not fine. You're better. Better than you've ever been actually, but you're not fine." She picked up one of the scholarship applications. "You know, Maya asked about you." James's head snapped up. "She did? She saw what you did with the foundation, how you kept her vision but stayed out of the spotlight. She said it seemed unlike the James she first met." "I'm trying to be unlike that James in every way possible," he said quietly. Amy studied him for a moment. "You really love her, don't you? Not the idea of her, not the challenge of her, but just her." James looked at the wall where he'd pinned photos of scholarship recipients in their white coats, their faces shining with the same passion he'd first seen in Maya's eyes when she talked about healing people. "I love who I became because of her," he said finally. "Even if she never comes back, I'm going to keep being that person. Because she was right about everything. About what matters, about using privilege to create change, about the kind of man I could be if I just got out of my own way." Amy squeezed his shoulder. "Well, that's good to hear. Because she's coming back next month. Some big medical conference. She's giving the keynote speech." James's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'll make sure I'm out of town. She deserves to have her moment without." "She asked if you'd be there," Amy interrupted. "Actually, she specifically said, I hope he comes. I'd like to see who he's become." For the first time in months, James felt something like hope flutter in his chest. Not hope for forgiveness or reconciliation. He'd let go of expecting anything from Maya. Just hope that maybe, just maybe, the person he'd become was someone worth knowing. The medical conference hall buzzed with anticipation. James sat in the middle row, deliberately choosing not to stand out. He'd arrived early, watching the room fill with doctors, researchers, and students, many of them recipients of the foundation's scholarships, though they didn't know he was the anonymous donor. Maya took the stage to thunderous applause. She looked different, more confident, if that was possible. A year of international work had added something to her presence that made James's heart ache with pride and regret. "Today, I want to talk about transformation," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Not just in medicine, but in how we view healing itself." James listened, mesmerized, as she shared stories from her work around the world. She talked about village clinics, about teaching local healthcare workers, about seeing real change happen one person at a time. Change isn't about grand gestures or big donations, she said, and James felt the words hit home. It's about showing up day after day, doing the work even when no one's watching. It's about becoming the person your community needs you to be. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. After her speech, James stayed in his seat while others rushed to congratulate her. He watched her accept praise gracefully, answer questions thoughtfully. Finally, as the crowd thinned, she walked directly to where he sat. "You look different," she said simply. "Less expensive suits," he tried to joke, but his voice was shaky. "No," she studied him. "It's your eyes. They're clearer somehow." They ended up in the conference center's garden, sitting on a simple bench. The same kind of bench where they'd had their first real conversation at the clinic a lifetime ago. "I saw what you did with the foundation," Maya said after a long moment. "No publicity, no name on the buildings, just the work." "I had a good teacher," James replied softly. "Several, actually." He gestured to a group of medical students chatting nearby. "They teach me something new every day. About determination, about dreams, about what really matters." Maya watched the students too. "Amy tells me you sold the penthouse, and the car collection, and most of your shares in the company. Turns out I didn't need most of what I thought I couldn't live without." He paused. "Though I did keep one thing." He pulled out his wallet and carefully removed a worn photograph. Maya took it, her breath catching. It was a picture from the clinic opening before everything. In it, she was laughing at something off camera, her face lit up with joy and purpose. "This was the moment," James said quietly. "The moment I should have realized that the bet was the stupidest thing I'd ever done. Because no amount of money could match what you gave those people that day. What you gave me without even trying." "And what was that?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "A chance to be better. To do better." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Maya. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that what you started, it didn't stop when you left. Your vision, your dedication to helping others, it changed everything. Not just programs and buildings, but people. Me, most of all." Maya was quiet for a long time, turning the photo over in her hands. "You know what I've learned this past year?" she finally said. "That healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about building something new from the pieces." She reached into her own bag and pulled out a familiar mug, her favorite one that she'd left behind that night. "I went back for this last week, found your letter, and all the plans you'd made." "Maya, She held up her hand. "Let me finish. What you did, starting our relationship with that bat, it was cruel and stupid and hurtful. But what you did after, that's the man I fell in love with. The man who actually listened when I talked about community health, who spent weekends organizing medical supplies, who saw the world through new eyes." "That man exists because of you," James said. "No." Maya shook her head. "He existed all along. He just needed a reason to break free from the Billionaire Act." She took a deep breath. "I'm not saying I'm ready to forget everything, but maybe we could get coffee sometime. At one of those regular places you learn to appreciate." James felt tears prick his eyes. "I'd like that. But Maya, I need you to know something first." He pulled out his phone and showed her an email he'd received that morning. "The Foundation's board met yesterday. They voted to make you the new director. Full control if you want it. Whatever happens with us." Maya stared at the email. "You're giving up control." "I'm giving it back to who it belonged to all along. The person who actually knows how to create real change." He stood up. "Take it. Take the whole thing. No strings, no expectations. Just your vision, your way." She looked up at him, really looked at him like she was seeing straight through to his soul. "Have dinner with me tonight," she said suddenly. "What?" "Dinner. That little place near the clinic where we used to get soup after late nights. I want to hear about these students you're working with. And I want to tell you about my plans for the foundation." A small smile played at her lips. "Since you'll be working for me now, technically." James laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and true. "I can think of no better boss." As they walked toward the exit, Maya stopped suddenly. "James, that bet you made?" About whether you could maintain a marriage with someone completely different from your world? Yeah? You lost at the moment you started changing your world to understand mine. And that's why, maybe, we might have a chance to win something real. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of hope as they walked to the restaurant, not touching but close enough to feel the possibility of tomorrow. Behind them, the conference center emptied of doctors and dreamers, all of them carrying a piece of the change that had started with a foolish bet and ended with a truth neither of them had expected. Sometimes love's greatest victories come disguised as losses, and the biggest transformations begin when we stop trying to win and start trying to become who we were meant to be.